Getting harassed, being sent death threats, or worse, simply for doing your job doesn't sound like fun. And our next guest says that's the reality for Canadian journalists. Brent Jolly joins us on the line, National President of the Canadian Association of Journalists. Brent, welcome to the program.
Hi, Elias. Thanks for having me on to talk about this.
So, Brent, I always like to put the cards out there on the table for interviews. There's a bit of self-serving to this interview, right? I'm working the media. I see what's happening to myself and colleagues on social media and that kind of thing. That's the self-serving portion, but I also want to throw this out there to set the stage for this interview. You know, when we talk about democracy, when we talk about where our world is heading, when journalism's attacked, it never works out for that country. It just, the history of the world. When journalism goes, there goes the country. So, bit of self-serving here. Bit of something that everyone should care about. Brent, let's get down to it. What are your concerns with what you're seeing right now?
Well, frankly, I mean, it's been completely what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is journalists dealing, like you said, with an intense anti-media sentiment. And that's really concerning for me. You know, we've seen reporters, as you've mentioned, harassed, berated, threatened for doing their job. And I mean, I want to be as unequivocal as possible here. That's unacceptable, and it needs to stop. Now, how do we make it stop? Well, you know, that's the bigger question. But I do think, you know, the media and journalists are definitely under siege. They have targets placed on their backs, and that's something that needs to change.
But, you know, Brent, just to be clear here, journalists their work can be criticized, like lots of people get their work criticized, right? That's not what you're saying here.
Absolutely, not at all, not at all. Criticism is absolutely fair game. You know, we've said this in public statements that, you know, that's nothing new. What is new, or especially escalating in the last couple of weeks and couple of months, frankly, is the attacks on the individual, the person's identity, gender identity, sexuality, you know, their affiliation, that they're the sort of enemy of the people kind of rhetoric that we saw in the United States during the Trump administration. We're sort of seeing that definitely bleeding over the border and into Canada now. And, you know, how that sense of polarization entrenches itself in our political discourse is extremely troubling.
What does the journalism say about where that rhetoric of journalists, enemy of the people, what is pouring gasoline on that fire in this country? What can you tell us?
Well, there's a few things. One, you know, we can look at political actors. I would specifically draw attention to Monsieur Bernier and some of his tweets that he's put out over the last several months. You know, he called out several reporters and told his followers to play dirty with them back in October. And that escalated itself into an all-out sort of assault on journalists, particularly women and journalists of color, who are especially targeted by these kind of attacks. And again, Monsieur Bernier did it again a couple of weeks ago. Now, I'd also draw your attention to some of the rhetoric going on currently in the House of Commons, particularly around the new Conservative Party leader, Candice Bergen, trying to, you know, discredit the work of journalists and what's going on. And this is definitely, you know, part of the political discourse that we're seeing right now, where politicians are playing politics, basically, and trying to score points with the safety of journalists. And frankly, you know, if the facts aren't on your side, the tact is to, you know, attack the messenger and democracy be damned. And that's not a good precedent to follow.
Brent, we're with Brent Jolly, National President of the Canadian Association of Journalists. Brent, I want to talk about the social media companies. In particular, I want to focus on Twitter just for the next little while. So Twitter, and I tell my listeners every day, because I'm on Twitter, you know, journalists and hosts and media people, we're all on Twitter, right? We make that site happen, by the way. And you know, I tell our listeners, you know, never sign up for Twitter. If you're on, please follow me. But if you're not on, never sign up for any reason. It's the world's worst website, right? That's what I tell my listeners all the time. And I just
toxic pit, yeah.
So Brent, it's a toxic pit that even though if journalists weren't on Twitter, the site would be dead, and they do nothing. Well, maybe they do something. Maybe that's part of your answer here. Shouldn't they be doing more here?
Oh, Without question, without question. I mean, one of the things that came out when I was talking about Monsieur Bernier's tweets from October, we've come out with a report today, actually, done with the Carleton School of Journalism and Communication and the Canadian Journalism Foundation that focuses on this. You know, what can journalists do, but also, you know, the critical role that platforms play in this, you know, based on how algorithms sort of pull various content in from, you know, the far reaches of acceptable speech and then, frankly, some areas of not acceptable speech. And also, you know, sort of how hate can spread like a virus and like wildfire, if you pardon my metaphor here, given the current circumstances, you know, and how that's privileged and ultimately monetized by platforms like Twitter and Facebook, for example. You know, this is if we're thinking about the public square, you know, as Twitter and other social platforms as in the public square, I don't think, you know, that we've done a very good job of making sure that, you know, individuals who espouse, you know, quite honestly, ridiculous views are held accountable for those actions. You know, it's not acceptable to threaten the lives or the identity of someone else. You wouldn't do that at a grocery store with the checkout clerk. You wouldn't do that at a restaurant with your server. So why do you think it's okay to do it online, talking to a journalist or someone else, a public figure, a doctor we've seen also attacks on? It's just beyond the pale, and it's got to stop.
So, you know, Brent, let me just throw one thing out there. I think we realize, as journalists and media people in this country, maybe we need to start having this conversation. Like I said before, Twitter doesn't exist without us, and they're doing nothing to protect us. Maybe we need to do something about that. And I know there's various ways we can go. But the last thing I want to ask you about is maybe fighting this kind of rhetoric with those same kind of tactics. Maybe maybe the Canadian Association of Journalists should start a TikTok, you know, and it should start an Instagram story about what journalists actually do. I mean, is there any bit of maybe that's what we need to do? Just fight back with the same methods?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, counter narrative. This is played out in, you know, strategic dialogue, studies of strategic dialogue, and all this. That the best way to counter you know, false or misleading narratives is to propose counter narrative. And this is something we're thinking about really, really strongly because it needs to be done. And I think there's definitely a lot of interest from, you know, news organizations and press freedom groups like ours to take this on and to actually do a much better job of showing the public the work that journalists do every day. Because, as you mentioned in the beginning in your intro there, you know, journalism is a pillar of democracy. And if we just want to flush, you know, journalism down the toilet, well, it's going to set us up for a very, very unfortunate future.
Brent, it's great talking to you. First time we've ever talked. Really great conversation. And I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Elias. Look forward to talking to you more about this.
Brent Jolly, National President of the Canadian Association of Journalists.